Welcome to GRE Snacks, snackable episodes about the GRE exam and graduate school admissions. I'm Tyler, founder of Achievable, and we have an affordable GRE course that includes everything you need to ace your GRE exam. A full textbook, videos on key topics, tons of GRE questions backed by our memory-enhancing algorithm, a built-in study planner and essay grader, and full-length practice exams. You can try it out for free by going to achievable.me, and if you like it, use the code podcast to get 10% off. Now, let's get started. Today, we have Lee LaBalle from MBA Clarity joining us, and really excited to have you back on the show.
Oh, thank you so much, Tyler. It's really great to be back. I always have such a good time here. And today we have a great topic, right? Reapplying.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to just introduce yourself for people who haven't heard you before?
Thank you so much. Yes. My name is Lee LaBalle. I am an MBA admissions expert. I have about 16 years of experience helping well over 600 clients across the world enter programs from Stanford to London Business School. I've been world ranked #1 by Poets and Quants. And my overall mission is to take the mystery and the misery out of applying, which I am now doing under my new brand name, which is MBA Clarity, because I'm trying to bring clarity to the process.
Yeah, I like that. It's a good name.
I do too. Also, people have trouble spelling my last name. They always put LaBelle. I'm like, no,
Right.
LaBalle.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I like the new name. Well, great.
Thank
Yeah, like you
you.
said, we're going to talk today about reapplying. And I mean, talk
Mhm.
me through kind of like the journey of, not being accepted in the schools that you wanted to go and kind of like having to go get geared up emotionally almost to like reapply again.
Yeah, definitely emotionally. So, when you apply to a top MBA program or a top master's, there's always, sometimes we look at Stanford, we got maybe a 6% admit rate, other top schools, 14, 15, 30%. So there is a possibility of getting rejected. It's not what the outcome we want, but it happens. And the first thing I usually tell people when they get rejected is that it hurts. Yes, absolutely, because it's very it's painful. I have a very good friend who is a grief counselor, and I've talked to her about it. It's like it is a type of grief because you
Mhm.
put so much effort, time, money. The test prep money, the application fee money. If you hire an admission consultant, money.
Mhm.
The schools all require you to be authentic and dig into your soul, so you get all emotional. You put everything out there, and they're like, "Nope, rejection. Sorry, we cannot accept you this year." And it's that's the first thing. Accept that pain and deal with it in however way you have to deal it, whether that's doing some yoga, sleeping all day, drinking 6 glasses of wine, whatever you need to get to a calm state where you can move on and apply again.
Mhm. Yeah, and then what's the first step then when you're going to start to tackle this process? Like, what do you start with?
The first step should be to try and do a very honest assessment of your application, right?
Mhm.
So whatever school you apply to has GRE test averages or TOEFL test averages, whatever it might be. Are your test scores under average?
Mhm.
This is kind of one of the easiest things. The first place, let's check the test scores. You can look for other weaknesses in your application. Maybe you're not demonstrating enough quantitative skill. Maybe it didn't come out enough in your recommendation letters or your resume. Maybe there's not enough leadership being highlighted. Maybe you didn't explain something that you should have explained, such as an uneven career path, several
Mhm.
job changes or a career gap. Um, if are you higher in age than the average student?
Mhm.
You know, um, Looking at your actual essays themselves, goals essays are a very core component of applying. Do your goals make sense? I hear all the time from
Mhm.
admissions colleagues, oh, we want to see goals that are achievable and ambitious and make sense with the profile. Um, there's just there's lots of factors like that. So that's where you have to stop. Are there red flags? Is there something I should have explained?
Mhm.
And how can I tackle them to be stronger? Right.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
Related to that, there's one other thing, and this one's heartbreaking to me. I see this a lot. People will often come to me, they hire me because they were rejected. And I'm like, well, the first thing I
Mhm.
need to do is see your essays. And one of the things that is just dreadful is that when they don't answer the question,
Mhm.
because the question says something like, please introduce yourself. and they spend 40 words talking about why that's, they spend 40% of the essay talking about why they want to go to that school or what they did in high school or something that's just not relevant to the question.
Right.
That's really heartbreaking because they put in time and effort and they were dead before they even hit submit.
Yeah, and I think it's also just important that um, as much as it like is like you kind of pouring your soul out a little bit in these applications, like you do have to be open to that feedback and be willing to kind of understand that like while you're doing it, especially if you're doing it for the first time, you're just kind of like learning as you go, right? And when you can actually look back
Hmm.
at it afterwards, you kind of can have a little bit more of like a third party perspective to it in a way
Hmm.
that can be beneficial for kind of like trying to like not get personal about it while you're critiquing it and
Yep.
improving it.
Absolutely. And because your personal story is your story, and more than likely that's not the issue. It's more that probably the issue is like how you told it or what, if you're applying to a school like Stanford, you need to be demonstrating impact and different
Mhm.
things. Or if you're applying to a school like INSEAD in France, you need to demonstrate an international mindset. And, maybe you have it, they weren't shown enough. It's hard to say. It's usually a combination of factors, right? And sometimes it's nothing at all.
Mhm.
Sometimes you are great. You have a great, everything's fantastic. You're a strong applicant and you still didn't get in. That can happen for so many reasons, from the competition to the number of applicants,
Mhm.
to internal things that have been happening in admissions offices. We've seen a couple admissions teams this year having some, inner changes, and that can also definitely hurt your odds.
Mhm.
And especially if you got to waitlist, if you had an interview and you got to waitlist, we know they liked you. Like, you don't get that far unless they're thinking, this guy could really fit in the program.
Right.
So yeah, so sometimes there's just nothing really concrete. That doesn't mean you can't still, you know, tweak your essays, hit harder on your leadership, get a little stronger on your career trajectory and your goals. And also, you talked about being open to feedback. A really good way to do it is try to get feedback from a third party.
Mhm.
So if you had friends or colleagues, especially if you work in consulting, there's always people around that have MBAs, or some, you can get feedback. Some of it will be good, some of it will not, but
Right.
it's a way to see things. You can also, a lot of people are like, well, I'm going to call the admissions director and ask them why. And it's like, oh, there are a couple of schools out there that may be more open to giving you feedback, particularly if you had gotten to waitlist. But in general, you won't get feedback because it's usually not really a single thing that led to your rejection,
Mhm.
and B, quite frankly, admissions does not have bandwidth to talk to every person that has been dinged.
Right. No, it's easier to just say like a blanket, like don't do it policy. I understand why universities do that.
Yeah, yeah, it's
I
true. I
also,
did have a funny story I had a funny story about maybe 8 years ago. A client who interviewed at Harvard, got wasted. No, I don't think he got wasted. I think he went directly to rejection. And,
Mhm.
unbeknownst to me, he just called up admissions to say, hey, what happened? And random, which, normally would not happen. The big wig director, who at that time, her name was Dee Leopold, she, whatever reason, answered the phone and she's like, you know what? Okay, let's take a look. And she looked at his file and she actually gave him feedback on what went wrong, which is just, he told me that, and I think my mouth dropped to the floor. I'm like, what? Not going to happen. Good, you want to try, good luck, but it's so unlikely.
Well, I think if you approach it and say, "Hey, I'm just looking like tell me, I would still love to go here. I'm still very interested. Tell me what would, most improve my resume in your eyes." Like if you phrase it that way, maybe it's not so much like a rejection feeling thing, and it can be a little bit easier to get some information.
Yeah, I get it. It depends on the school. I don't think any of the top 15 would respond with anything more detailed than, oh, be reflective, take a look, consider
Right.
our
They
website.
actually would probably just
But
have a canned
you want to
response. You're
try?
right.
You want to try? Rock on. You want to try it? Go ahead. Um, so anyway, let's say you've done this. You have looked at your profile and you're like, okay, I do see my score could have been higher. That's what you do next.
Mhm.
Work to improve all those red flags. If your test score
Mhm.
is under average, or even if it's not, and you still think, well, I definitely could have done better.
Hmm.
take it again, get a higher score. If you do have a career trajectory that's maybe not super clear, make sure you write an optional essay or you write your reapplication essay in a way that kind of
Hmm.
explains that, right? So it's, I always tell my applicants, if there's something unclear or unusual, explain it, because otherwise admissions just doesn't know. If there's a career gap because you were off doing a volunteer work in Ghana and you don't say anything, they could very well think you were off like at the beach partying. Like how would they know what the gap is
Hmm.
about, right? Um, Definitely improve your resume. I think one of the things I often see is people will send me their resume after they've been rejected. I'm just like, okay, I have no idea what you do. Like,
Hmm.
what? So you definitely make sure take effort. There's a difference, as you and I have talked in the past, between an MBA resume and a school resume.
Hmm.
If you think that when you looked at your profile, oh, I didn't really have enough leadership, I didn't really show enough extracurriculars, if you've got 6, 8, 9 months to reapply, make sure you get some leadership and some
Hmm.
extracurriculars. So there's lots of ways that there's steps you can take to really, really improve.
Right, yeah. And it's also things that you will kind of have more bandwidth for the second time around because you've done all the other stuff before. So you kind of like know what you need
Absolutely.
to do.
Yeah, like, for example, that you have to get transcripts done or you have to fill out a very long data form. Yeah, definitely you
Hmm.
kind of know a little bit better the second time around. Um, Something else I see a lot when people, I'm thinking of a client of mine from last year who came to me, he had been rejected. And when I read his essays, his goals didn't make any sense. Like,
Hmm.
so a lot of schools, Chicago Booth, LBS, Columbia, Stern, many, many schools ask you, what are your goals, right? And even if
Hmm.
they don't ask you in the essay, such as, Harvard doesn't necessarily ask, or MIT, if you get to interview, absolutely, hey, tell us about your goals, right? So what I see sometimes is that the goals won't really be very clear. Like, I want to apply to the MBA to open the opportunities. I really am interested in the AI and what's happening, so I could find some chances. It's like, what? What do you want to do? Now, it's 100% true. When you go to business school, the world is going to explode. They talk about the FOMO, the fear of missing out, because so much is happening, so many seminars, classes. So you absolutely are going to expand your mind. You just can't tell admissions, I'm going to expand my mind.
Hmm.
You need to be a little bit more like, I work in consultant. I've been specializing in telecom projects, and I see huge opportunities with the application of AI. Therefore, my
Hmm.
goal is to do X, Y, and Z, and I need the MBA in order to do that, right? The MBA has to make sense, right?
Yeah, it has to be like the MBA is a part of the plan, not that the MBA is the plan. Because I feel like that's
Yes,
sometimes how a lot of people apply.
absolutely. That is 100. It's one of the things I talk about with all my clients. I have two questions. Well, what's your personal reasons for going to MBA, and what are your actual goals post MBA?
Hmm.
So what I was mentioning, I had a wonderful client last year. I mean, he was like, I cannot tell you, he's from an emerging country, just delightful, amazing, smart. And he had been dinged everywhere. And when he sent me his essays, he's like, my goal is to go into BC to do this and this and this, and I'm going to work in California. He's in this emerging country working at a fast moving consumer goods company. And I'm like, so admissions is thinking, how how can we get you? How are we going to get you from there to VC in California? Oh,
Hmm.
we don't want to upset you. We don't want you to be an unhappy graduate, so we're just going to reject you. We
Hmm.
can't help with those goals, right? Um, and that's it. That happens. So I went back with him this year, and we sort of deep dived. It's like, okay, is that really going to happen? Do you really? And we were able to kind of like help him develop a more reasonable pathway. The goal was still
Hmm.
VC in his home country, but he developed a pathway that made sense in terms of his background experiences, his
Hmm.
strengths, what that particular school offered. And this year he did great, got a couple M7s. So I'm very happy for him.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, I think in general, it really is like about playing to your strengths and about kind of taking the time to reflect on what those are, like, and asking other people for help, I think. Because it's always really hard to
Absolutely.
evaluate yourself.
It's so important. my admission colleagues, friends, or my MBA admissions consultant friends, of which I'm thankful to have very many across the world, they hate me when I say this, but you don't really need an admissions consultant. Like, you don't. There's enough data out there. You can
Hmm.
figure it out. However, you need somebody, right? It's like you said, it's like, okay, go get buy your How to Apply the MBA book, whatever you get, but get someone on your side, whether it's
Hmm.
someone who's done it before, a friend, and even an English editor is better than nobody. That
Hmm.
said, why do you get an admissions consultant? Because we definitely know the ins and outs. Like, if had this guy I was mentioning who had the bad goals worked with me or a colleague before that, he would have never said that goal in the first place. Like, we
Hmm.
would have stopped that already. Or if a client or if someone came to us and it's like they're applying to, a school where leadership is so important and they're not highlighting, we would have made sure it was highlighted. It's like,
Hmm.
what we can do is we can preempt a lot of mistakes that would lead to dings. So I always tell people, I can't guarantee that you'll get in, but I can
Hmm.
guarantee that you're not going to make a dingable mistake.
Hmm. Yeah. So yeah, for I think then once you kind of have gotten your application tuned up, is the plan usually to reapply to the same schools again, or are there other
Hmm.
special considerations
Yeah.
with reapplying?
So I think I like to call it, well, first of all, you've done your due diligence and you've kind of reassessed your plan, and maybe you realized that when you applied only to Harvard and Stanford, that was that was one of the mistakes, that maybe you weren't quite, didn't have the right profile for those schools. So you
Hmm.
definitely need to kind of expand your school portfolio. I often tell applicants to think about their end game, like what is it where you want to be longer term.
Hmm.
This, for example, if this guy who did want to do VC work back in his country, well, you need to make sure you go to a school that's got connections to the VC world, even though that's not your short term goal. You need to go to school that's got a brand name. So when you go out to ask for funding, they're like,
Hmm.
oh, yeah, you went to this school. Great. So you should know your end goal. And that also takes into account things like age, right? If you applied, already at 28 or 29 and now you're 30 or 31, you might have to also open, because there's schools that are going to trend older. There's schools that, you know, how do I say this? What I'm trying to say is that your odds become even lower the older you get for lots of reasons. So
Hmm.
if you want to make sure that this is your year, you're gonna have to open your school list, right? So it might not be just M7s. You might have to look at T15s or European schools or regional
Hmm.
schools or even part-time MBAs or something like that. So I think that's part of that analysis, um, to know what really works for you and where you have the better odds and the better fit.
Hmm.
So definitely I would add schools for sure. And then if you do decide that you're going to reapply, like, oh, I applied to Columbia and it is still my favorite and best, most wonderful option, then definitely reapply and tackle the red flags.
Hmm.
And now you have to know how to reapply. So every school is a little bit different. Columbia has in the past always required reapplicants to just write one single reapplication essay and a new letter of recommendation. You can share a resume as well, but other schools like Stanford or Harvard or Wharton want you to do everything again from scratch. You got to start
Hmm.
over, write your essays again. Um, and of course, Tyler, you probably know Stanford has this wonderful essay called What Matters Most to You and Why. So
Hmm.
if you wrote your heart and your soul and now you're reapplying, it's like, what changed? Does
Hmm.
it, you would imagine that what matters most to you stayed the same, right? However, maybe it's just a matter of execution. Maybe your stories weren't clear enough. So you'll have to figure out what it is they're looking for and then write it in context of what you've already written, right?
Hmm.
So if you told, like, some schools will, actually, I think most schools do not check the old application until you at least are starting to move to interview phase. Some
Hmm.
schools don't check it, some schools check it later, but you don't want to have your new application totally contradict your old application, right?
Right.
So if you talked about, how hard it was growing up poor, you don't now talk about how great it was having rich parents, right?
Hmm.
Um, the story has to be consistent. And then if you're changing your goals, let's say you've done that reflection, you should say, doing deep reflection, talking to my mentors, considering, what it is I really want to do and how I get there. I've clarified my goals and realized that. So you
Hmm.
got to kind of explain to them, like, yeah, or if you realize that maybe you are a little bit older applicant or a little bit younger applicant, maybe you directly, I realized that when I came, I maybe didn't have enough leadership, and I've improved that.
Hmm.
So there's lots of different ways to sort of tackle it, but you need to know what the school wants. And then, like you said, if you apply to new schools, all the new learnings that you got from the rejections, you're applying to these new applications.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. And you're also taking the opportunity to maybe kind of evolve the story. Like I feel like it's got to be important to, even if you are going back with the same goals, to like have like a what's new or what have I done in the last 9 months to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that would be like the checklist. Yeah, I'm sorry,
Hmm.
I didn't make that clear. So if you've done that reapplication sort of went through your red flags and you improve things, you would absolutely say something like, since applying last, I
Hmm.
raised my GRE score by this points because I did Achievable and it was so amazing. um, or, I had this promotion, or,
Hmm.
because, my goal is to be in sustainability, I've been volunteering with a sustainability consulting company, or
Hmm.
because I care about AI, I took this course. So everything you've done, if you continue talking to students, you might say, oh, and I've also been really closely in touch with the head of the sports analytics club at your school, and we're
Hmm.
doing this or doing that. So we absolutely definitely need to give them a checklist of all the ways you've improved,
Hmm.
especially when they have an essay like Harvard or Columbia's that specifically says, tell us how you improved since you last applied.
Right. Yeah, I like that they just like kind of set aside something for that, so then it's pretty clear where it goes.
Yeah, exactly. With other schools where they don't necessarily have a reapplication essay, they expect you to kind of weave it into the story, and that's, it's doable.
Hmm.
Definitely have someone consult with you on how to do that, though.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Um,
I think
yeah, so
those
is
are
there
kind of
anything
the main
else?
things.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think this has been a really informative episode with a lot of great tips for our listeners on
Yeah.
reapplying. Do you kind of have any parting thoughts on this before we wrap up?
Um, the last thing, I guess, what we would do, we always talk about, do your school research, talk to schools. If you get waitlisted or dinged or directly dinged, um, definitely make sure. I don't know what you did in your first time around, but the second time around, go talk to more people, talk to more alumni, like really reach out to the community, and do more groundwork. Because sometimes, quite frankly, I'll hear clients I'll meet people who got rejected. It's just they didn't spend enough time. Oh yeah,
Hmm.
I decided to apply. Oh, I decided in May for the September deadline, or something like that. And so they didn't really have enough time to do everything because they spent most of their time prepping the tests.
Hmm. Right,
So,
exactly. And I think you still will have those contacts that you made from the first round, or at least know
yep,
kind of what groups you're interested in, and you can actually try to, pursue that anyway.
go deeper.
And
Yeah,
that's a
absolutely.
great
So,
way to show interest for sure.
yeah, and don't give up on yourself. That's another thing. Because, like I said, that when the rejections come, it's hard.
Hmm.
Um, and that I've had, don't give up. If I find that most people apply for these top MBAs, they already have the right profile. Like, you don't just decide, if one day, oh, I'm going to go to an MBA when you have no business background or degree. So people who are applying are highly prepared. So
Hmm.
when they get that rejection, it can be quite like, oh my God, maybe I'm not good enough. And it's like, don't give up on yourself that easily. Just, if
Yeah.
this is your dream, you will indeed make it. So get back up and try again.
Yeah. No, that's a great note to end on. Thank you. This has been Jerry Snacks, hosted by Tyler from Achievable with Candy Lee LaBalle from MBA Clarity. And Achievable has a great online GRE course you can try for free at achievable.me and use the code podcast to get 10% off at checkout.